Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Thank you. So today we'll be discussing from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13. In chapter 13, Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna about the concept of the super soul. He elaborates in detail, so we'll go over them. Yeah, we are starting from chapter 13, text 14. First, we'll offer the prayers.
What the people have to give us?
Yeah.
Mercy? Okay, I'll go.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanaतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुम् उन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yeah, I would like to seek all of your blessings so that we can discuss on this important topic of the super soul, which is explained in chapter 13. 14, chapter 13, text 14, page 544.
I have an older Bhagavad Gita.
It's okay, just same page.
540.
So then so the text is
40.
Yeah, 14.
Page number 544.
Yeah. So we'll do the first verse. Sarvatah pani padam tat sarvato shiromukam sarvatah shruti malloke sarvam avrita tishtati. So we'll try to cover many, we are covering like 3-4 verses, so we'll skip the individual recitation of verses and we'll start with the translation. So Krishna is describing about the super soul to Arjuna. So here is a translation. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As the sun exists, diffusing its unlimited rays, so does the super soul or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He exists in his all-pervading form, and in him exist all the individual living entities, beginning from the first great teacher Brahma down to the small ants. There are unlimited heads, legs, hands and eyes, and unlimited living entities. All are existing in and on the super soul. Therefore, the super soul is all pervading. The individual soul, however, cannot say that he has his hands, legs and eyes everywhere. That is not possible. If he thinks that under ignorance he has not conscious that his hands and legs are diffused all over, but when he attains to proper knowledge, he will come to that stage. His thinking is contradictory. This means that the individual soul, having become conditioned by the material nature, is not supreme. The supreme is different from the individual soul. The Supreme Lord can extend his hand without limit. The individual soul cannot. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that if anyone offers him a flower or a fruit or a little water, he accepts. If the Lord is a far distance away, how can he accept things? This is the omnipotence of the Lord. Even though he is situated in his own abode, far, far away from earth, he can extend his hand to accept what anyone offers. That is his potency. In the Brahma Samhita 537, it is stated, Goloka eva nivasati akilatma bhuta. Although he is always engaged in the pastimes in his transcendental planet, he is all pervading. The individual soul cannot claim that he is all pervading. Therefore, this verse describes the super soul, the personality of Godhead, not the individual soul. So, Prabhupada is explaining and actually comparing this super soul to the sun, right? So that we can have a better understanding of this concept of the super soul, because super soul is spiritual, right? We are now having this material senses, and we don't have any idea or any realization about spirituality, right? So Prabhupada is giving us an analogy so that we can easily relate to it, right? So here Prabhupada is comparing this super soul like the sun, right? So wherever during the daytime, wherever we go, we can spot the sun, right? So in that way, Krishna in the form of Paramatma is present everywhere, right? He has unlimited, his hands, legs, eyes, heads and faces are everywhere, right? But we cannot claim that, right? We cannot claim that, I have influence everywhere. I know what is happening in Hawaii right now. No, I have no idea, right? But whereas Krishna in the form of super soul, he has his energies throughout everywhere so that he can know what is happening where, right? Like we see that, in countries, they have spies, right? They have spies in different places, in different countries also. And they have their network through which they can collect information, right? So in the same way, Krishna, through this, his feature of super soul, he exists everywhere. And through that, he becomes all, he has this potency of knowing everything or accessing anything and everything, right? Right. So Prabhupada is commenting that, some people, right, if they read this particular verse, they actually explain or they translate it as if this is referring to the individual soul, right? But Prabhupada is contradicting that point here in the purport, because Prabhupada has this famous statement that God is always God. It's not that God becomes God on a particular day, right? Right? So Prabhupada is emphasizing that if one may assume that, I can acquire knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and after that I can have the potency that I can know everything and everywhere, right? So that is a misconception which is there in some scholars who read Bhagavad-gītā or on their own, and they know a little bit of Sanskrit and they translate it and they mislead the people, right? So Prabhupada is basically claiming that argument is false. So he's claiming that the Lord is omnipotent all the time, and there is always a distinction between the Lord and us, right? We cannot become God, and God is always God, right? And also Prabhupada is enlightening us on another nice point, that the energy of Krishna is beyond our imagination. All of us can understand certain aspects of this material nature, right? And science over like 300, 400 years, right? It can understand certain aspects of the material nature. Each individual person contributes a small, tiny bit of it, and knowledge expands. And even now, after hundreds of years of this development of this modern science, many of the scientists themselves claim that we hardly know anything about material nature, right? So it's so complicated, it's so intricate, and then what to speak of the spiritual nature, right? So it is beyond our perception, right? So that is why Prabhupada is explaining that this omnipotence of the Lord, that although he is in the spiritual world where he is having this wonderful pastimes with all of his devotees, and it's all he's having a great time, right? Even then he can access our devotion wherever we are, because his energies are spread out through different means, so he can access that and he can still reciprocate with our love. All right, so here in this particular verse we understand 3 points, that first his all pervading nature, right? And second is that he is omnipotent, meaning that his energies are beyond our comprehension. And this particular verse is talking about the super soul and not about the individual soul. Okay, so next, let's move ahead. Anyone wants to read the next verse?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
The English or the Sanskrit? Sanskrit.
Sanskrit and English both, yeah.
Sarvendriya gunabhasam.
Sarvendriya gunarbhasam.
Sarvendriya vivarjitam.
Sarvendriya vivarjitam.
Asaktam sarva bharsaiva.
Asaktam sarva bhrakchaiva.
Nirgunam guna bhoktracha.
Nirgunam guna bhoktracha. The translation.
The supersoul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature.
Yeah, also the purport, please.
The Supreme Lord, or the source of all the senses of the living entities, does not have material senses like they have. Actually, the individual souls have spiritual senses, but in conditioned life, they are covered with the material elements, and therefore the sense activities are exhibited through matter. The Supreme Lord's senses are not so covered. His senses are transcendental and are therefore called nirguna. Guna means the material modes, but his senses are without material covering. It should be understood that his senses are not exactly like ours, although he is the source of all our sensory activities. He has his transcendental senses, which are uncontaminated. This is very nicely explained in the Savesatwatra Upanishad. In the verse, Apani Pado Javano Grihita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has no hands which are materially contaminated, but he has his hands and accepts whatever sacrifice is offered to him. This is the distinction between the conditioned soul and the super soul. He has no material eyes, but he has eyes. Otherwise, how could he see? He sees everything, past, present, and the future. He lives within the heart of the living being, and he knows what we have done in the past, what we are doing now, and what is awaiting us in the future. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. He knows everything, but no one knows him. It is said that the Supreme Lord has no legs like us, but he can travel throughout space because he has spiritual legs. In other words, the Lord is not impersonal. He has his eyes, legs, and hands, and everything else. And because we are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we also have these things. But his hands, legs, eyes, and senses are not contaminated by material nature. Bhagavad Gita also confirms that when the Lord appears, he appears as he is by his internal potency. He is not contaminated by the material energy because he is the Lord of material energy. In the Vedic literature, we find that his whole embodiment is spiritual. He has his eternal form called Satchitananda Vigraha. He is full of opulence. He is the proprietor of all wealth and the owner of all energy. He is the most intelligent and is full of knowledge. There are some of the symptoms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the maintainer of all living entities and the witness of all activity. As far as we can understand from Vedic literature, the Supreme Lord is always transcendental. Although we do not see his head, face, hands or legs, he has them. And when we are elevated to the transcendental situation, we can see the Lord's form. Due to materially contaminated senses, we cannot see his form. Therefore, the impersonalists who are still materially affected cannot understand the personality of God.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, right. So, in this particular purport and translation, Prabhupada is basically now going one step into describing how the Lord's senses and our senses are different, right? The Lord has senses, but his senses are also spiritual, right? Meaning that he can, so he has a face, he has hands, he has legs, right? But they are under his control, right? But whereas we, right, the living entities who are in this material world, right, we only have a desire and we have a free will, but all of us senses are being dragged here and there by the three modes of material nature, right? We have the sattva guna, the raja guna, and the tama guna, right? So right. During the early morning time, we are generally in the mode of goodness. We are more peaceful, right? In the afternoon time, we want to do action, right? And in the evening or in the night time, right, we try to sleep, right? We tend to sleep. So this is how in a particular day the modes of influence. I mean to say the modes of nature act. Meaning that in the early morning time, the modes of goodness is more, right? So generally people are more inclined to do something like meditation or yoga or anything, right? And in the afternoon time we are dragged to do something active, right? It's like we cannot be at peace, we need to have something going on, some productivity, right? I have put in X amount of hours into it and I need something, right? So that is called as mode of passion, right? And and then in the night time, right, we tend to sleep, or also we are dragged down by our lower modes, meaning that generally you see people outside, they take intoxication in the evening, in the night before they go to sleep, right? So generally people go to clubs or bars mostly at the night, right? So it shows that we are actually dragged by material nature, right? But whereas Krishna also has his hands, legs, eyes and everything, but he is not contaminated by any of these, right? So Prabhupada is explaining by describing this term called nirgunam, meaning that without material qualities, right? To describe the senses of Krishna. Anyone has anything to add until now? All right, we'll move ahead. Anyone wants to read the sloka? I'll actually hit you another mic so that.
No, it's okay. I can speak loud like this.
Okay, all right, all right. Sure.
You're from the same community.
All right. Yeah.
बहिरन्तश्च भूतानां चरमेव च सूक्ष्मं तत्त्वात् तद् विज्ञेयं दूरस्थं चान्तिके च तत्. Translation is: the supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the unmoving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far away, he is also near to all. So the purport is, in Vedic literature, we understand that Narayana, the Supreme Person, is residing both outside and inside of every living entity. He is present in both the spiritual and material worlds. Although he is far, far away, still he is near to us. These are the statements of Vedic literature. Asino duram vajanti sayano yati sarvataha. Katha Upanishad 1-21. And because he is always engaged in transcendental bliss, we cannot understand how he is enjoying his full opulence. We cannot see or understand with these material senses. Therefore, in the Vedic language, it is said that to understand him, our material mind and senses cannot act. But one who has purified his mind and senses by practicing Krishna consciousness in devotional service can see him constantly. It is confirmed in Brahma Samhita that the devotee who has developed love for the Supreme God can see him always, without cessation. And it is confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā 11:54 that he can be seen and understood only by devotional service. Bhaktaya tu ananya sankyaha.
Yes, thank you. Right, so here, right, Prabhupada is explaining how this super soul exists inside and outside all living entities, and it is and he is present in both moving and non-moving, right? And but to access his presence or to understand his presence, we need purified consciousness. All right, because even in this current world, right, we understand, right, to get any power, right, you need hard work and you need to put in effort, right? So nothing is cheap, right? Because if that person is not qualified and he acquires power, then he could misuse it, right? So then what to imagine about understanding about this Supreme Lord, right? If anyone can access his power, basically Krishna basically explains that he becomes a servant of his devotees. So then we need. So if Krishna becomes servant of his devotees, it means that the devotee is so qualified and he is so pure that he is not going to do anything wrong with the power which he has access to, right? So that is why Prabhupada is explaining that we need to be purified, right? If anyone needs to be needs to have access, we need to be purified. And Prabhupada explains that only through devotional service we can understand him. Right? In Brahma Samhita, it is said that the devotee who has developed love for the Supreme God can see him always without cessation. Right? Okay. Anyone has anything to say about here? Okay.
Very nice to know here that the Prabhupada is saying that he is very far, far away, but he is still near to us. I think that's a very comforting,
Yes.
thought that he is expressing here.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that point. In fact, when Draupadi, right?
Draupadi.
We see that Draupadi was in a very miserable state, and she cried out helplessly, and then Krishna immediately appeared and he provided all which she needs to keep her safe. Right? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is like we are saying that it has to, person has to be purified.
Yes.
What is the process?
Yes. So the process is to develop Krishna consciousness, right? So Lord Chaitanya has introduced this easy process of hearing about the Lord and chanting his names, right? So by regularly developing these practices, of primarily hearing and chanting, then actually Rupa Goswami describes 64 different methods to understand bhakti, and out of them 5 are the primary: hearing, chanting, deity worship, staying at a holy place, and what is the fifth?
Good association.
Association. So these are the 5 potent ways through which we can understand or purify ourselves.
Yeah, one more thing to add here. Krishna and his name are not different. It's the same.
Yeah.
In material, we are in a material world. That's why our name and we are different.
Right.
But Krishna and his name is the same thing. So when you say Krishna, it's basically you are calling the Supreme.
You're connecting with him. Right.
That's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave us this Maha Mantra, so that we can chant and we can purify that heart.
Okay. Let's move to text 17. Anyone like to read 17?
Avivittam cha bhuteshu vivaktame vicharitam bhutbhartu cha tarchigyam grashir pravishishmu cha. Although the super soul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. Purpose. The Lord is situated in everyone's heart as the super soul. Does this mean that he has become divided? No, actually, he is one. The example is given of the sun. The sun at the meridian is situated in its place. But if one goes for 5,000 miles in all directions and asks, where is the sun? Everyone will say that it is shining on his head. In the Vedic literature, this example is given to show that although he is undivided, he is situated as if divided. Also, it is said in Vedic literature that one Vishnu is present everywhere by his omnipotence. Just as the sun appears in many places, so many places to many persons. And the Supreme Lord, although the maintainer of every living entity, devours everything at the time of annihilation. This was confirmed in the 11th chapter when the Lord said that he had come to devour all the warriors assembled at Kurukshetra. He also mentioned that in the form of time he devours also. He is the annihilator, the killer of all. When there is creation, he develops all from their original state, and at the time of annihilation he devours them. The Vedic hymns confirm the fact that he is the origin of all living entities and the rest of all. After creation, everything rests in his omnipotence, and after annihilation, everything again returns to rest in him. There are the confirmation of Vedic hymns. Yato va imani bhutani jayante ena jatani jivani yak prayanti abhishanti tad brahma tad vijnanasava. That's Veda Upanishad 3.1.
Thank you. Right. So this is another aspect of the super soul. Right. So Krishna is explaining that although he is everywhere, although his form of the super soul is spread out everywhere, it doesn't actually mean that he is actually divided. Right. We actually think, okay, so if we have some sand with us, right, we have a bag of sand, right? So if we distribute sand everywhere, then we can say that the sand is everywhere. So now the original sandbag is no longer there, right? So but Krishna's energy is not like that. It's inconceivable, achintya, right? So his energies are spread out everywhere, but still he is only one. He is not divided, right? It's so intriguing, right? Right, and then right, he not only does the job of maintenance of every living entity, but he also devours and develops all, right? So he has different aspects of his energies, right? So as a super soul, he is the one who sanctions all of our desires according to our qualification, and he allows us to experience or to attain certain things, right? So that is the maintaining nature or the maintaining potency of the super soul, right? And through the form of time, right, he devours everything, right? Yeah, anyone has anything on to say about this?
I like that example of sun, that like sun is that everyone can say, okay, that sun is on my head. Like sun is one, but the rays are everywhere. And everybody can see that sun. Wherever he sees on the head. So like that Krishna is also that he is the one, but we can see the rays in every jiva. That the potency of that God, we can see in the every jiva, like that sun, that Prabhupada gave the example of sun. Very good, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we'll also read. Do we have time? We have time, right?
I don't have my watch.
It's almost
7:50.
7:50. One more sloka is okay. Yeah, I think this actually concludes this concept. So anyone like to read this sloka?
I'll read something. Jyotishamapi tajyotitasmat parmuchyate jnanam gyayam jnanagammayam hidi sarvasya tishthritam. Now we can read the translation.
He is the source of life in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge, he is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. The super soul, the supreme personality of God, is the source of life in all luminous objects like the sun, moon, and stars. In the Vedic literature, we find that in the spiritual kingdom there is no need of sun or moon, because the intelligence of the Supreme Lord is in there. In the material world, that's too loud.
No, it's good.
Brahma Jyoti, the Lord's spiritual effulgence, is covered by the Mahatattva, the material elements. Therefore, in this material world, we require the assistance of sun, moon, electricity, etc. for light. But in the spiritual world, there is no need of such things. It is clearly stated in the Vedic literature that because of his luminous effulgence, everything is illuminated. It is clear, therefore, that his situation is not in the material world. He is situated in the spiritual world, which is far, far away in the spiritual sky. That is also confirmed in the Vedic literature. Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat. Sweta Swartara Upanishad 3.8. He is just like the sun, eternally luminous, but he is far, far beyond the darkness of this material world. His knowledge is transcendental. The Vedic literature confirms that Brahman is concentrated transcendental knowledge. To one who is anxious to be transferred to that spiritual world, knowledge is given by the Supreme Lord, who is situated in everyone's heart. One Vedic mantra, Sweta Tatra Upanishad 6.8 says, Tamha Devam Atma Buddhi Prakasham Mumukshur Vai Saranam Aham Prapadye. One must surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead if he at all wants liberation. As far as the goal of ultimate knowledge he is concerned, it is also confirmed in the Vedic literature, Tam eva vidviti mritam eti. Only by knowing him can one surpass the boundary of birth and death. He is situated in everyone's heart as the Supreme Controller. The Supreme has legs and hands distributed everywhere, and this cannot be said of the individual soul. Therefore, that there are two knowers of the field of activity, the individual soul and the super soul, must be admitted. One's hands and legs are distributed locally, but Krishna's hands and legs are distributed everywhere. This is confirmed in the Svetasvara Upanishad 3.7. Sarvasya Prabhahum Ishanam Sarvasya Saranam Brahat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Super Soul, is the Prabhu or Master of all living entities. Therefore, He is the ultimate shelter of all living entities. So, there is no denying the fact that the Supreme Super Soul and the individual soul are always different.
Alright, thank you. So, in this particular verse, right, Krishna is explaining how He is the source of everything, right? He is the source of knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and He is the goal of knowledge, right? And He is also situated in everyone's heart. You know, one thing which I like about teachings of Prabhupada is that he never deviates from the Shastra, right? You know, I kept on hearing his classes, but after I was reading this Bhagavad Gita, right, it actually improved my faith on Prabhupada, because he was not going anywhere outside, right? He was strictly sticking to whatever Shastra is there, and he's elaborating it in a way so that we can understand, right? So that is a difference between an honesty. Anyone who is honest, right, he clearly tells, I know this much and I'll speak on this much. He'll not speculate on things which are beyond his purview, right? So Prabhupada is strictly sticking to the parampara, and he's explaining us all the information which Krishna has described to Arjuna, right? So here Prabhupada is explaining that how his energies are different to the energies that we see around, right? So in the first paragraph, he's explaining how in the spiritual world there is no need of an artificial light, right? Because or even the sun, because all living entities are actually having spiritual effulgence, and right. So it is right, and because that effulgence is blocked by the Mahat Tattva, we are not able to access that effulgence. So that is the reason we need electricity or sun and moon, other elements to lighten up. All right, and in the second paragraph, Prabhupada is basically describing how the knowledge of Krishna is transcendental, right? Meaning that we have no perception of it. We on our own cannot perceive it unless He hands and unless He helps us out. All right. Right. I have actually heard this nice example. You know, if you want to know whether this particular table is having fresh paint or not, what would anyone do? Touch it, right? Right. And on the other hand, if you want to know about the stars, what would you do?
We can see it.
Or talk to an expert who's an astronomer or who's into science, right? So we should also be intelligent enough to identify our limitations, right? We shouldn't be egoistic and think that, okay, I can understand everything. You know, you have to use some common sense to understand what things I can understand through my senses and what things I cannot understand, right? So then, only then if you are humble enough and you're accepting the reality, right, only then our knowledge can expand, right? So the Lord's energies are transcendental, meaning that we cannot understand His energies and Him through our senses. So that is why Prabhupada is urging us to take up to this practice of Krishna consciousness, so that once we start practicing the chanting, the hearing, and slowly purifying our consciousness and developing love towards Him, right? Slowly and gradually everything will be revealed. All right. And so I think we are running out of time. We'll just chant the sloka of 19, right? Iti kshetram hata jnanam gneyam choktam samas tataha madbhakta etad vijnaya madbhavayo prapadyate. Thus the field of activities, the body, the knowledge and the noble have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. Right? So, Krishna has basically described to Arjuna about the different aspects of the super soul, and then he's concluding by stating that you can gain this knowledge only by becoming a devotee. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Very nice.
That's